Hi, I'm Audrey Wennink, Senior Director at the Metropolitan Planning Council, and we're here to talk about the ambitious promise of transit reform with NITA. Certainly been a theme of the day, and we're so glad you all chose to be here in this session. So what we're going to do is I'm going to give a very brief presentation, just quick overview of NITA. You probably know a lot about NITA, but just for those who don't. And then we're going to have some facilitated discussion with our esteemed panelists, and I'll introduce them in a moment. And then we'll have some Q&A, so be thinking about what questions you might want to ask our panelists. So let me get started first with a quick overview of NITA. So the headline of our transit story, and we've heard this from both our keynotes, is integration and regionalism and a rider-centered transit system. We've decided to build a whole new agency to take on the responsibilities that are listed in this slide by making it easier for riders to understand and ride the system, to make transfers, to buy fares. More people will ride transit, and that's good for the whole region. We know we have a lot of work ahead of us to make these changes, and we'll be shifting a number of responsibilities from existing agencies into NITA. The legislation defines that a transition plan must be developed to work through the many details like policy, process, and staffing changes so that NITA can successfully deliver all the things on this slide that it will now be responsible for. The work on the transition plan will be happening between this summer and next summer. And there are a number of other really interesting aspects to NITA, not the least of which is the governance. A major innovation is that the structure of the NITA board will involve overlapping with the service boards. As you can see here, that 17 out of the 20 NITA board members will also sit on one of the operating agencies, which will give us far more integration and communication throughout the region. We're hoping for and expecting appointees to have a regional perspective and not to come to the table just to advocate for a single geography. We will now have 5 appointments from the governor's office, which will add to that regional perspective. A real innovation is, as I said, this overlapping format. So there will be a big picture view, but there will also be understanding of the specifics of what it takes to run an operating agency. Importantly, in this bill, we've upgraded the expectations for board members. They will have to have demonstrated relevant experience, and there will be required professional development, training for new directors, plus annual training on financial management and procurement. For the operating agencies, the larger solid circles represent board members that sit on both the NITA board and an operating agency board. So you can see here that for each of the operating agencies, about half the board members will be overlapping. In terms of funding, we're all really excited that we have more than the money that we needed to fill the fiscal cliff. But we have to remember that there are a number of new responsibilities that will be taken on by this new agency, which have costs to them. And then the remaining funds for improving service frequency and reliability will be used for that. But it's a reality that costs will increase, and we need to make sure that in every way possible, we're gaining efficiencies and that we are stewarding this money very carefully so that the most possible can go into service expansion. In terms of implementation deadlines, there are a number of deadlines in the bill, and I'm not going to go through all of these, but a few salient ones are the deadline of September 1st, when the new board members will be appointed. The formal 20 appointees that the new ones, or could be some that are continuing on from the current structure. There will be a regionally coordinated service plan that starts on March 1st of 2027, and we'll have unified regional fare payment by 2030. So there's a lot of exciting things to look forward to. We see some people clapping for that. So we're going to just leave this over on the side so you can glance over to it as desired. And now I'm going to turn to our panel, and we're going to get into the conversation. Everyone's comfortable? Okay, so we're really, really pleased to have with us Bria Scudder, who serves as Deputy Governor for Infrastructure, Public Safety, Environment, and Energy in Illinois, where she manages several state agencies and implements top policy initiatives. She was the leader for the governor's office on the NITA negotiations, and she has many other accomplishments in her bio that I know we have had in the program, so I won't go through every detail. We're excited that Tom Kotarac is with us. Tom Kotarac is the Senior Vice President of the Civic Committee of the Commercial Club of Chicago. He leads the Civic Committee's transportation and infrastructure work. He was a board member of the RTA and is now a board member of NITA, representing the city of Chicago. He also spent time at CMAP and on Capitol Hill, working for Senator Durbin. We also are very pleased to have Maulik Vaishnav with us. He is leading NITA implementation in Governor Pritzker's office. He joined Bria Scudder's team to advance early transition milestones in the NITA Act and ensure timely delivery of reforms and new funding for the regional transit system. Maulik has spent time at the RTA, CTA, and in the mayor's office. And we also are very excited to have Jonathan Garcia here with the Illinois Department of Transportation. He is the Assistant for Special Projects in the Office of the Secretary of the Illinois Department of Transportation. They lead major policy and organizational initiatives across the department related to artificial intelligence, data modernization, interagency engagement, sustainability, and transit, and is project manager for IDOT's role in implementing transit reform across the state. So this panel should have answers to just about anything you might want to know. All right, we're going to, whoa, that sounds loud. We're going to now talk a little bit about what's been happening since this bill was passed and since it went into effect on June 1st. So I'm going to ask each of our panelists to talk a little bit about, more specifically, about your role in NITA implementation. So we can just go right down the line. Bria?
Sure. I have to start by saying I'm excited to be here with you all, and of course, everyone on this panel was so critical in making sure that we get it to the finish line, so I have to say that, and thank you. We're just after June 1st, so I'm trying to limit my excitement, but really difficult to do that when we're starting implementation on so many things like what you've just described. And so I think what our role has been is making sure that we're seeing through on the vision and the promises that we made to the people of Illinois. So that includes making sure that we're working with other appointing authorities, talking to them about their appointments, making sure that we're doing things on time. Jonathan's gonna talk a little bit more about the role that IDOT has in helping us through this transition process. We've met with all of the agencies, so CTA, Metro, and PACE regularly to try and really get started on the right foot, so get on the same page, start coordinating now, and identify some of the quick wins that we can get now that NITA is in effect. So that also, and working with law enforcement. So we've talked with the county sheriff, state police, CPD to make sure that they're also ready to lead on some of the safety needs that were also included in NITA.
All right, I'm going to start with a thank you and a congratulations to every single one of you out here, particularly my colleagues that are sitting here with me, for participating and being successful in one of the biggest and, in my opinion, best bets that Chicago has made in a long time, which is that transit can help us be the greatest global city in North America, and that transit's at its core. So I just want to say thanks. You should all have a round of applause. Go ahead and take it if you want. And you should also thank yourself that it's 3 o'clock on a Friday, and you're still here and not ran off to the bar. So whoever's on the Transport Chicago board, maybe we should bring drinks to the last session of the day. But it's a huge moment, and for the role for myself is kind of changed throughout this. Really as advocate, working with many of you in the audience to call for increased investment and a change in the way that we operate, govern, and finance our transit system. And then somewhere along the line, I was put onto the Regional Transportation Authority board. So then it's as board member, really bringing some of those experiences that I've had working as an advocate and as a planner and as a policy person. But tying it all together is really what NITA is all about. And it's a vision that from my peers and colleagues across the country are really looking at us to make this work. That if the legislature and the governor really called for us to integrate transit, but integrate it with land use and economic development and public safety, that we can succeed and we can really grow our population and grow our economy and cement our place in the world. And it's something that's really exciting, and just to be a small part of it has been pretty cool.
All right. As Audrey was presenting, I was telling my friends here that I was getting more and more stressed about the timeline up there. There are a million things to do from the perspective of implementation, but my role really has been bridging the transit is an actively operating system, as many folks here from RTA, CTA, Metro, and PACE know. We have many things out there that are live, while there's a lot of expectation of change. So one of the big things I appreciated is Deputy Governor and team thought, 6 months ahead of the implementation date, starting in January, we started having conversations about creating a NITA implementation framework in the governor's office to provide that leadership during this space where there could be confusion between agencies and how to provide leadership there. So that's what we've been working on. There's a lot of work going on since February to come up with different work streams. We'll get into that in a bit, but also translating that on the agency side and making sure that we are remaining close to coordinated to make sure that any new initiative that's coming up is aligned with the NITA Act, even if the NITA Act went into effect just last week. So that's really important to make sure that some of this regional coordination on the transit side starts to happen as quickly as possible before all of these deadlines show up on our implementation calendar. So I'll turn it over to Jonathan.
Thanks. There's a lot of heavy hitters on this panel. I don't think that I'm one of them, but my name's Jonathan Garcia. I am sort of the project manager for NITA implementation at IDOT. IDOT's role when it comes to transit in Northeastern Illinois historically has been through grant making and rail safety oversight, and I'm sure many of you are familiar with aspects of those processes. But the legislation, the NITA Act, which I worked when I was in the governor's office with Deputy Governor Bria Scudder to advance and eventually get passed, that legislation has a new role for IDOT when it comes to transit oversight. Specifically, there's a couple things related to NITA that we're going to be engaged in and that we'll probably get more into as these questions continue, but essentially we're going to help procure a consultant to help with the transition between RTA and NITA. We're also going to stand up a couple of committees that'll be really focused at improving the relationship between IDOT and the Northeastern Illinois transit system, but then also coordinating transit outside of Northeastern Illinois in the downstate region. There was a panel on downstate transit I'm sure some of you went to. I heard that it was great, so I won't dive too deeply into that, but for now, that's sort of my role is to oversee all of those efforts and to make sure that IDOT is implementing this in a way that is aligned with the vision that Maulik and Bria and Tom were discussing about a regional vision for NITA.
Great, thank you. So, Tom, you have been a little bit on the front seat since you're on the NITA board, and things have already happened in that board's responsibilities since the bill was implemented. So do you want to tell us a little bit about kind of what has happened with the NITA board, even since implementation, and then since the bill was passed, and then since implementation?
Well, I'll highlight a couple pieces. One, it's really expanded the art of what's possible. And the first and most important part was to increase the investment in transit, which happened on June 1st at 9 a.m. And we'll now be able to invest $500 to $600 million more into the transit system and do so in a different way that the future leaders of NITA will have to put together according to the statute. So more investment, number one. But we're already seeing that the rider is really centered. Maulik could probably speak to the amendment that allocated some of that funding and the very different approach to that and the different kind of conversation we had at the board level. But we also created something during the debate about NITA at the RTA board called the unsexy ad hoc committee. But it was really trying to bring together, there's 47 people on the 4 boards that are involved in transit right now. And very few of us meet together, and so we had an idea to bring the chairs of CTA, Metro, and PACE together with a small group of RTA board members under the idea that if we were looking at each other at the highest level of the policymaking bodies, that we could start doing some things together. And I think that was, it seemed simple, but it was pretty new, and it produced a lot of different sort of, oh, well, okay, we can do this, and it also, I think, allowed some of the folks at the management level and below to work together where maybe that wasn't happening before. I think you're seeing this also in the rider improvements that are coming out, as we speak. Probably folks know about the Metro service, 20 minutes and 30 minutes on the Rock Island and on the Metro Electric. There's a lot more of that coming. The vision of NITA is bold and big. The implementation is going to take some time. It's going to take a staggered approach. We're going to be continually moving towards that vision, and you're starting to feel that. And I think we're starting to do that together more than we ever had, and hopeful that after September that really goes into overdrive.
Yeah, Maulik, can you tell us about those implementation working groups?
Yes, and many of the folks in the room are involved. I'll try to point some of that out, but there are many things that the RTA currently or I would say a year ago, does not really do, and now NITA will have to pick that up pretty quickly. So one of my goals was that while we are working with the governor's office, and part of sort of the larger structure of implementation is how are the folks on the day-to-day basis in our office are working at RTA, CTA, Metro, and PACE to advance a bunch of initiatives. So at the very tail end of November, when a lot of the budgets were already put together, it's just incredible that such a large investment was passed through the state. So first of all, that completely unlocks opportunities, as our director was saying, that has been hard to do before. Money has been frankly used sometimes as an excuse, a lack of money, I should say, but that excuse was gone. The funding is coming. We have to work together. It's the law. So that led to formation since January of these working groups where a lot of the folks in the room have been part of, and whether it's land use and how we structure our grants, whether it's for the first time we have a service planner at RTA Joshua right here. So we started changing how we do things between our agencies, but also within the RTA team, to prepare for NITA, and that has led to a lot of the initiatives that the board approved just in May that will begin launching, including service improvements, public safety coordination, a lot of pilots, including some non-police violence prevention pilots at CTA. There's a host of things that will come up in the rest of this panel, but it's been really important to have that because the riders are not going to wait for our governance and administrative structures to be put together. The funding is starting to come through in the next couple of months. Since June 1st it went into effect, but as you know, it takes several months for the cash to get to the RTA/NITA. So we wanted these quick rider-focused improvements to happen right away, and the planning began pretty much right after the budget process was completed, and that is what you'll start to see on the system throughout the summer. And it has been really important to also have the governor's office and the deputy governor, as she mentioned, join on a monthly meetings with the service boards, with law enforcement agencies. So there's a level of clarity that people are not running initiatives by themselves. This is a regional conversation across 6 counties.
Great, thank you. Jonathan, IDOT has issued 2 RFPs related to NITA this spring. IDOT's going to have responsibilities related to the Interagency Coordinating Committee on Transit Innovation, and then there's also an IDOT Transit Integration Policy Development Committee. Can you tell us more? And then there's also the transition plan. Can you tell us more about each of those procurements?
Yeah, sure, I'm happy to. And I'll start with the last one. So we issued an RFP to bring on a consultant to help us come up with a transition plan that will guide the development of the transition from the RTA to NITA. We refer to it as the transition consultant. The transition consultant is going to have a whole host of responsibilities and is going to operate on a very, very tight timeline. Their first reporting deadline is going to be July 1st, 2027, in which they'll have to report to the RTA board, or sorry, the NITA board, a list of all of the things that they've accomplished. And some of the responsibilities of the transition consultant include studying procurement practices and making recommendations on where to consolidate across the agencies, where to elevate certain things up to NITA, studying the capital planning process that occurs currently at each of the service boards, devising a new capital planning process that would be housed at NITA, and on across essentially most aspects of the RTA/NITA transition. So they're going to have a lot of responsibility, and IDOT, we're going to work very closely with the transition consultant, with RTA/NITA, with each of the service boards, and of course with the governor's office to make sure that we're all on the same page as the consultant does their work as to what the direction of that work should be. So that's a little bit about the transition consultant. And then there's another RFP that we issued that is going to help us with the development of 2 committees that IDOT's going to be responsible for, and those are the committees that Audrey named. First is the Interagency Committee. So the Interagency Committee is going to be focused primarily on downstate transit outside of the Northeastern Illinois service region. There's, I want to say 59, 56, somewhere around there, transit providers across the state that are not RTA, CTA, Metra, and PACE. And they appreciate having a forum in which they can discuss common issues across their agencies and ways that they can work together to innovate and to increase service both across their service areas and to Chicago, whether it be through intercity bus and intercity rail. And so the scope of that committee is going to be bringing together those agencies to make sure that they're all on the same page about how to best coordinate their service for folks that are traveling to and outside of Chicago. And then the second committee is a Transit Integration Policy Development Committee. This is going to be mostly internal focused, looking at IDOT. I think there's this perception out there that IDOT doesn't have the greatest relationship with transit agencies sometimes, and I think we'd contest that, but I think when it comes to capital projects specifically, there's a need for improvement as to what the timelines of different projects is, making sure that IDOT, CTA, Metra, PACE, whoever it is, that we're all on the same page about what it is each of the transit agencies are planning for their capital projects. And this can come specifically in cases like bus rapid transit or bus priority projects that might happen down the line as the NITA funding comes online. We at IDOT want to make sure that we are prepared to work very closely with the transit agencies to implement what it is that they want out of their capital planning processes, especially in areas in which those things intersect with state roads. And so that committee will be looking very closely at each of our internal policies and procedures, identifying areas for improvement, working closely with the transit agencies to understand their needs and their concerns about the relationship between the transit agencies and IDOT, and really trying to smooth that road such that when the transit agencies are ready to invest in something like BRT, bus priority, that kind of thing, IDOT is ready to meet them where they are and to get those projects moving as quickly as possible.
Jonathan, I neglected to mention that you're also making a new hire related to that policy development office. Could you just mention a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so IDOT is responsible for hiring a transit coordination oversight officer. This is someone that would essentially be, at IDOT senior level and would be working across each of our district offices to coordinate with transit agencies not only in Northeastern Illinois, but also across the state on the delivery of capital projects. So that person is going to be responsible for leading the Transit Integration Policy Development Committee, certainly, taking a close look at each of those policies, making sure that we are keeping on the same page. Although I would emphasize, too, that this is not just solely going to be the responsibility of that person. I think there's a real momentum within IDOT to make sure that the work of this committee is successful and that we are able to implement real change across each of our regional offices in our central office as well. And so that's going to require more than just the work of that person to get those initiatives across the finish line.
Great, thanks. Bria, now the governor's office is going to have an expanded role with NITA because there are going to be 5 appointments and there's going to be an increased stake by the governor's office in the success of NITA. Can you talk a little bit more about what you expect the governor's office role and perspectives to be moving forward?
Yeah, I have to say, we are very excited about that role, that expanded role. I mean, the governor is really invested in the transit system, and so it's always been a little odd, right? I think we get questions all the time about where we have input, who each agency's boards have been so different that I think it can be confusing, and so this kind of brings more of an opportunity for us to collaborate. I mentioned this earlier. It's really important for us to have engaged and qualified appointees. You mentioned the qualifications that are now set. That was something that we talked about a lot to make sure that not only do we have folks that are able to participate in a meaningful way, but that also the riders are seeing that we're intentional about the participation and having qualified people make the decisions for the system. So I would say we're excited about having that input that we didn't have before, and also more input across other appointing authorities. So.
Great. So now a few questions that all of you can take a crack at if you like. We want to think about coming out of the gate and being as successful as possible from the beginning. What do you think are the most important things that must happen in the coming year for the transition to NITA to be successful? And what do you expect to see as some quick wins?
Our chief transition officer.
This is where all the stress starts to bubble up. I just think that this level of attention, funding, and opportunity for our transit system hasn't really existed, and it is our job at the 4 agencies to take full advantage of it. So I think to your point, significant improvements in service are already planned. We are working already through sort of a small consulting project before the IDOT assistant kicks in to make sure that there's improvement in transferability between interagency services, where we have heard quite a few complaints in the past that schedules are sort of designed sometimes in a little bit of a vacuum of transfers. Obviously, there's an opportunity with the additional funding to keep the level of service that exists, but build upon the additional service that takes that regional perspective into account. On public safety, there'll be a law enforcement task force that is led through the sheriff's office, but includes other law enforcement agencies. So that coordination will kick off. I think there's a coordination council that has to be set up that includes non-law enforcement presence and focus on some of the quality of life issues that we see where police is not the right response, and how we are developing that for transit agencies in a unified way. And the ability to set some of these new structures up at NITA instead of sort of broken out at each agency is going to be the core, I think, area of success. Our fares have been extremely affordable, but I'll also mention that we are looking, and the board has approved funding to advance the access pilot that Cook County President's Office has supported with Metra to expand to CTA and PACE in the very near future. So there's so many opportunities to combine these things together. So as a rider, as we ride the system, we should see that unified approach. And those are some of the things that by the end of the year are going to be our biggest priorities to implement.
Yeah, I mean, just adding on to that, I mean, obviously from our perspective at IDOT, the single biggest thing that needs to happen within that first year is the onboarding and the work of the transition consultant, right? And in order to make the transition consultant's work successful, that requires a unified vision from the governor's office, from IDOT, from the NITA leadership, as to how that work will be engaged, and more importantly, to make sure that the transition consultant has the right amount of access and insight into each of the service boards and the RTA in order to accomplish and actually analyze all of the things that they're supposed to be making recommendations on. And so we are all going to be working very closely to ensure that that is the case and that the transition consultant will be able to meet that reporting deadline of July 1st, 2027, because it is really ambitious.
Anyone else? All good. Okay. What opportunities lie ahead for people who care about transit and want to be part of this exciting future?
Well, if you're not thinking about it already, for all of you who work in the industry, inside and outside, I think it's a unique and singular opportunity to really question the status quo and the past taboos and all of those ideas that you had in a keep notes on the phone or scribbled in a notebook, or man, why are we doing this? Or you had run into a roadblock before because something happened, or you self-checked yourself because you thought this would never happen. Start fresh. Start thinking about a different way of doing things, the best way to do things that have the rider and the service in mind. And let's get a way to get that pipeline of ideas from the workers and the riders into the delivery of the system. I think if we can't overdo asking the riders, the workers who operate the system, the planners who think about the future, how can we do it better, and then live up to that, to those ideas.
I would say, I agree with that 100%. We need all of you to participate and look forward to that, hearing more of that feedback to making sure the system works better. And then on the public side, there are advisory councils that'll continue, so whether it's related to the system or ADA, so making sure that there's plenty of opportunities for public participation in those. The public hearings that are required, so whether it's on the budget, and I think there's a new requirement for public hearings on system planning, and so making sure that there's participation there and finding new ways to encourage riders to engage and making sure that that feedback is incorporated.
I think there are so many, I have a planning background, but lots of planners in the room, but just transit professionals and anyone else that we can pull into the transit world away from any other forms of transportation is going to be our goal, because what is being asked of us is a lot more than what we currently do. I think that there's a lot of sort of understandable discomfort of change within the agencies, but globally, as you look at the combined NITA infrastructure, it's going to be bigger than what we currently offer the public and the riders. So I think for the folks, this is just an exciting opportunity. It might take us 6 months, 12 months, a couple of years to get there, to create the right structures to support that. To Director Kotarac's point, we want to bust the old ways of doing things, so that will require changes within teams and who does what. But globally, I think it's a really exciting time for folks who are here and in the transit planning space, because it's the only state, Illinois will be the only state outside of New York that has fully solved the fiscal cliff and gone beyond to grow us. That is a rare opportunity that we have in our region.
Jonathan, do you want to add anything? Okay. So related, but a little bit different, thinking about all the people in this room, many of whom work for transit agencies, but many of whom work just in the transportation sphere. What can people in this room at this conference do to help make NITA evolve into a strong and successful transit agency?
Well, if you're not in the public sector and you've been dying to get in, think about coming in working for it. I do think it's, if you look again across the nation, where is the opportunity ever been in your career or in your sense of the industry where a city and a region as big as Chicago has decided to essentially strip things down to the studs, put in new leadership, and put in new structures to deliver an integrated transit system that has land use as the other side of the success. It's Chicago. It's in our DNA. I mean, this is what, if you think about, people think about Chicago, it's big shoulders, it's Burnham, it's planning, we build things. This is us. We're getting back in the game. And it's an exciting time. It's one of those things that really makes me proud to be a Chicagoan and living in the region. And I think this is an opportunity for you to help build that legacy, because when we invest in transit, it's going to last for generations. And it's a singular moment where you can really set that precedent and put us on the right trajectory. So when people are like, man, I love them doing this, 50 years from now, you can, look over to your grandchild and be like, yeah, I went over there and I helped do that. And I think that's a pretty cool opportunity.
I think I sort of answered a part of it in the last question, but there's a very clear mandate. I think that's the other piece I wanted to mention, whether it's fair policy, fair integration. That clarity is, from my perspective, as having been part of the previous sort of iterations of this, is going to be extremely helpful for us in sort of the staff side of the house of setting things up, to have very clear idea of what the future looks like. And that's really important, because then you're not guessing around, you're not setting teams up that don't make sense. And in that, we need all the help we can get outside of the transition consultant for those who are not in the public sector and may not end up joining. I think there'll be more opportunities from the NITA side to bring people in. We are looking at how to evaluate things correctly from the academic side. I see Kate, who has been on the transit panel with us before, but looking at equitable outcomes coming out of all this investment we are about to make and how we measure that correctly. So I think there's opportunities from the academic side, from the private sector side, from non-transit folks, and obviously within our transit world.
Yeah, I don't have a ton more to add. I think this was all great. I mean, I think for our work with the transition consultant and each of the committees, there will be plenty of structured opportunities to get feedback in, receive public engagement, make sure that people have insight into the work that we're doing. And to the Deputy Governor's point as well, there will be, all kinds of hearings. There'll be so many hearings that you might not even be able to keep track of them, but we're gonna try and, get the comms out there as much as possible. And so, show up and hold us accountable to the goals of the NITA Act, because to Maulik's point, right, the legislation has a lot in there that is very ambitious, and the goals that it sets are very specific. And we are going to do our absolute best to make sure that those goals are met. But it's going to take the buy-in of the public and each of you to make sure that we are able to get there. So we would really appreciate your engagement on all of this.
I'm only going to add to what everybody's already said, and that's we really need everyone to be engaged. I know, I've talked to a few folks that said, maybe now that there's change, I should do something else. Absolutely not. I think it is now the time to engage more, and so I wanted to just add that. And I heard the word equity from one of the answers, and I think this is a real opportunity for us to think about how to consider equity in the decisions that are made more. I think there's this idea that so many decisions that are made about the system are political. We need to get away from that and think about what does the system need? What are the neighborhoods that have been underinvested in? How do we make sure there are new ways to provide opportunities for those areas? And we need information from all of you to think about that and to make sure that those communities, those riders are have new opportunities and are considered.
That was perfect. Okay, now it's time for you to ask all the burning questions that you have on your mind. And I saw a hand just shoot into the air. Mary Nickel. we have people that are going to run over to you with a microphone.
Mary,
That's why you sit in front, so you can get in first. Well, first, thank you all for your leadership in making this happen. Our grandkids will someday thank you too. Jonathan, you were speaking a lot about a transit committee and referencing you thought it would focus on internal IDOT processes. You know, I work for Chicago DOT, would love to help you with that process, one, but two, was curious what you how the local transportation departments could help you in your mission to figuring out how IDOT approaches its new transit management role.
Yeah, I appreciate the question. And I mean, I think there's going to be a huge role, and we're going to have to think through what exactly that role is. You know, obviously, CDOT has been a great partner to us, and you know, we have great partnerships across the RTA NITA service region. And I think there's been times in which CDOT or other local partners have made asks of us that will help point us in the right direction in terms of what the Transit Integration Policy Development Committee is going to be working on. And so I think a lot of this effort is going to come together. Like, for example, I'm sure that you know that there's all kinds of internal efforts currently at IDOT to rethink our relationship with local departments of transportation. And you know, that has been certainly an interesting path that we've been following, but I expect that this will intersect with that severely, such that it sort of creates this culture of change across the department. Not only will it be responding to the needs of transit agencies, it'll be responding to the needs of CDOT, it'll be responding to the needs of locals. And we've made steps in that direction significantly already, right? To the point about advancing equity in other communities, you know, we recently, this past year, put out $400 million in local funding that a whole host of municipalities across the state took advantage of, with few strings attached to just implement the projects that they wanted to implement. And a lot of those projects included multimodal considerations, included you know, facilities for bike and ped and transit. And so there's been steps in that direction. I think this will eventually evolve into, like I was saying, a holistic approach to thinking through how IDOT is considering its design considerations and feedback from other stakeholders. And so I'd expect to stay tuned on that. I think we will move in that direction, and I think it'll help really evolve the work of the department.
Here's another question here.
Hi, my name's Ams Kamani, and I recently graduated with my master's in urban planning from the University of Illinois. I'm interested in starting my career in public transit planning, hopefully here in Illinois. And so I want to thank all of you for the work that you've put in and continue to put in making our home a better place. One thing I've been thinking about throughout this discussion is that some of Illinois' most innovative transit success stories are outside the NITA region. The Champaign-Urbana Mass Transit District, for example, was recognized by the FTA in 2022 for national leadership in innovation and sustainability. CUMTD was also the first transit agency in the nation to deploy a hydrogen fuel cell bus fleet. Many downstate transit systems have been forced to innovate with far fewer resources than agencies here in Northeastern Illinois. As NITA moves into implementation, how do you make sure that this relationship is truly a two-way street? And in other words, how will NITA not only coordinate with downstate transit agency providers, but also learn from and incorporate best practices from agencies like CUMTD that have already demonstrated success?
I'll say one thing and have Jonathan respond, but I was an intern at MTD, so yes, it is a great example of how even in some of our smaller cities where you have the right ingredients for a lot of transit ridership, you can provide the type of supply that people will take it and it's not a car-oriented campus and for the general community. But from a NITA perspective, we're really going to rely on our relationship with IDOT, which is why I'll give Jonathan the mic.
Yeah, I appreciate the question, and I think that the structure that is set out in the legislation and the structure that we're implementing is going to be effective at addressing that. So like I said, we're setting up this committee with all these downstate agencies in which they'll come together and discuss their needs, certainly, but then there will be plenty of opportunities for interfacing between that committee and the work of the NITA transition consultant, the work of the Transit Integration Policy Development Committee, so that this isn't just a siloed approach in which we're just implementing each of these things in isolation. This is going to be sort of a whole of government approach to improving transit, not only in Northeastern Illinois, but in downstate. And so I think certainly there's plenty of lessons that we can learn from downstate transit agencies, and a lot of lessons that downstate transit agencies can learn from Northeastern Illinois if only they had the funding to do it, right? And so to your point, the NITA Act also includes a significant chunk of change for downstate transit agencies that will really help them be able to staff up, be able to increase service. And I think in a lot of cases, Champaign-Urbana is a great example of a downstate transit agency that has fixed route service, that has frequency, that gets people on a transit. A lot of other downstate transit agencies serve as a lifeline for vulnerable communities in rural areas and maybe don't have the infrastructure yet to not only provide that service, but then level up to considerations of mode shift. And so part of the work that we are going to be doing, both in the downstate committee and across IDOT, across RTA, across the governor's office, is to make sure that those agencies have the resources to be able to provide better service on behalf of folks across the state, and service that connects to the service that we are all looking to provide here in Chicago. So hopefully that answers your question.
I'm going to add one of my sort of underappreciated pieces of the NITA Act, and that's Metra acting as an inner-city rail provider. That's a total game changer, and it's incredibly, the potential for that to integrate with the transit systems downstate and provide different connectivity for folks across the region is huge. And having the governor and his leadership and his appointees at the regional board to think at that scale is a really big opportunity. So how do you start using what had been a commuter system to be an inner city system so that those sort of silos and binaries start, sort of coming down, and all of a sudden it's an integrated system, not just for the region, but for the state.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much. My name is Sarah Fiorito, and I work at the City of Evanston. Thank you so much for your work on this. It's very exciting. I just wanted to ask, in terms of next steps, I know a lot of focus has been given to improving service and safety and a lot of different elements of the service and network itself. One question that I have is, has there been consideration, and maybe I haven't seen it, but I haven't necessarily been as tuned in as others, about actually promoting ridership? Because I know that a lot of what I see sometimes is when service is put out right now, a lot of it is empty. I'm not saying it's all empty, but I do see a lot of service being offered that is not full to capacity, and I think there's definitely, like, from a program or promotion side of things, a lot of work to do to actually get people thinking about transit or taking transit. So I just want to ask if that's part of the equation, because I think sometimes we talk about, like, oh, if we just improve things, everyone's just going to jump on transit, and I think there is, like, a cultural piece. The other side note, if there's time to answer this, is just any considerations that you all have regarding integrating bike share into the regional transit system. I know Audrey and I have spoken before, and others, about how that was originally part of the MMA Act and that initial version of the legislation, and just if that's something that folks are thinking about, or if that's just going to have to happen later. Thank you.
I'll just say, music to my ears. I'm a big fan of the mass part and mass transit. I think it's ridership, ridership, ridership. If we're not getting people to use the system and more of them, what are we doing? So I think track and react has got to really be the new mantra. We need to figure out the routes and the ways that people are traveling that has changed and adapt to it. I think there's a lot of different things that you're starting to slowly see out with the Metro Regional Rail piece, running more through the weekends. You know, again, evolving from a commute-heavy AM peak, PM peak, to a different model is something that's we are now mandated, and it's a long time coming to do so. And for example, one of the things that I'd been bringing up for some time is that PACE is looking at their bus route network, and they had hired a consultant, and CTA decided to do their first bus redesign, arguably in decades, hired the same consultant by chance. There is no way we're going to do that in a siloed way. We've got to use all of those assets to get as many riders as we can into the system and have that planning process be iterative so that the service is connected and can continue to improve to serve more people. I think that's absolutely at the core of it.
I'll just note that there is going to be a new Office of Rider Experience and Safety. And so that's going to be a whole new place to absolutely see what needs to be done so the rider experience is superior and people want to come back.
I don't have to, but I was just going to say that I think we have a unique opportunity where a lot of younger folks are interested in transit, and we have to take advantage of that and make sure that we're taking that feedback and using it and make sure that they're at the table and making some of these decisions. And I think just in terms of the things that are preventing people from riding, that has come up in some of the answers we gave on what are some of the things that we can do now to make it better and make people feel safer. And also, like, it's our job to make sure we're putting out information about what we're doing. We have to show people that we're doing things differently. I don't think we should assume, we can't just say, hey, trust us, it's better. We have to actually engage people in the process, and so we're also considering that.
Oh, and also, yes, on bike share. We're getting a little bit there with the CTA's new proposal for, is it $5 off your 30-day pass? Unless you're a 30-day pass person, then you don't get the $5 off. But I think that's the beginning of the interest, is that all shared modes, whether they're scooter, bike, or what might come next, how do you integrate that into the transit network from the beginning is really where I think we're going to start and have started and will do going forward.
Hi, my name's Dan Forbush. I work at Metro. Something that came up this morning at the NICD session was they talked about their 20-year strategic plan that they are restarting, and they said that their plan started with like an employee survey where they surveyed the people that worked at NICD. I'm kind of wondering if that part is going to be part of the NICD transition as well. I mean, it might be a little broader than just like NITA's employees or the service board employees, but I'm just curious if that's part of the transition plan up here.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there are several layers of this conversation that's going on. That one, the workforce is growing from the frontline perspective. We need to make sure that the employees on the frontline who are actually running our systems are seeing the benefits out of this legislation and funding. So there's some questions, and Director Kotarac has pushed RTA/NITA already to look at how when we survey our riders about public safety questions, how are we engaging the employees? So there are specific areas where we'll be looking at that, but to your larger questions around the larger framework, the transition consultant will certainly support us in making sure that when we ask questions around, or when they are looking and evaluating, there's several functions identified in the NITA Act, like marketing or legislative affairs or service planning, where there should be consolidation at the central agency level, that it takes the current employee's perspective into account. So there should be outreach. Given just the size of our system, it may not happen in this one specific way, but the ability to get the employees to weigh in is extremely important.
Elizabeth Scott? Oh, no, there's somebody in the back first.
Thanks so much. Charlie Rodering with CMAP. I just have a quick question as well in terms of the funding side of things. So obviously a lot of the funding for NITA is going towards the operational component of it. We have a significant multi-billion-dollar capital backlog as well. Just wondering what the plan is to sort of address that, given post IAJA that's expiring September 30th, and the discretionary grant side of things obviously is not going to be quite as robust moving forward as well. So just wondering what the sort of long-term plan is on the capital side as well. Thanks.
I'll start, but again, we have all received questions and sort of questions around capital in general. One, there is a more unified sort of centralized process required around capital and how we take advantage of the dollars that we currently have. So in the past couple of years, we have looked at a couple of prioritization models out of RTA, but the NITA Act really puts us at a different level in that conversation. But as part of that, the state is giving $180 million more a year already on capital. So there will be conversations over the next year of what should that fund and what should be the process to make those decisions. That's different from the way we currently do things. But there are some back-end numbers being run. We have our capital folks right here of what could happen if the federal discretionary funding begins to decline. And this is some of the questions that the director has asked in recent board meetings. So the long-term requirement to fill the state of good repair gap doesn't go anywhere. So we will continue to advocate as part of the local, state, federal level capital plans to make sure there is a continued stream of funding, because the most important piece has been for transit agencies, you can't have a 5-year gap and then restart the tap and then turn it off. And we have really seen governor's office take leadership since 2018-19 with the Rebuild Illinois plan, but now the federal government could do something here that could change that equation, and we want to make sure that even if the funding is less than what we might need long-term, it is continuous. That is the most important piece for the transit agencies.
There also are some provisions in the NITA bill, fast-track provisions to help make sure things aren't delayed, and that should help. Time is money, so it should help manage cost a little bit.
Thank you. Hi, Elizabeth Scott from CMAP. We've talked a lot today about some of the nearer term goals of the NITA transition, but I think it could be valuable for this group to hear a little bit about where we're driving to in 2033, to talk about service standards. This is a performance-based planning fans here in the room, and I think the service standards component of this reform has not been as broadly discussed as perhaps it could be. And I think it would be wonderful if you all could touch on how the world is going to be different in 2033 in terms of how we spend our money and make our decisions.
One, I just want to say thank you for your leadership, and Daniel sitting next to you, and Team CMAP for the plan of action for regional transit. I don't know anywhere else where there is government who is asked by their General Assembly and governor to answer how can government get better and have a government trusted like CMAP to come out with something that was very bold and different. Also, thank you for asking a question that could be an entire panel for 3 hours at 4:15. And I'm going to hand it to Maulik to answer it.
This is what I'm worried about in transition. But I think Deputy Governor has laid out a pretty good vision during some of the negotiations. Like, people want to see much better service. They do not care about the underlying ways of how we get there, even though they're extremely important. So I think that vision in 2033, that we are able to get around our 6-county region with the ability to use whatever service we would like to, transit, still that's important. That is sort of the overarching goal, that our ability to not have long waits for passengers in transfers, to think about how to use both technology, I guess everyone's talking about AI, but down the road, making that ability easier through the level of service we need. What you are getting to is how there are sort of steps put into the NITA Act to get there through sort of 3 different phases, I would put it quickly. Sort of the immediate phase that over the next couple of years will move into a NITA-sponsored transition service plan for the region. So looking at service together, that has an impact on how the funding is calculated, the operating funding. It will start with sort of NTD measures of service, and there are 4 different measures. I won't keep us here again away from the drinks. But then within 3 years, you move towards launching service standards and moving the funding towards that. So you're really saying that if we need and want to pay for 5-minute service of certain type, then the funding is attached to that instead of our current existing model that was very much devised on where did you collect the funding, where it goes, transportation crosses boundaries, the funding was very attached to boundaries, and then over the next 6 years we are moving away from that. So it will be frankly a period of transition for 6 years in terms of how that funding will happen, how the budgets are developed, but the ultimate goal is that we are able to move across 6 counties without having to think a lot about it, which is how we currently do if you have a car. And that's really the goal that I think you're alluding to. But again, it would be its own panel to get into the weeds of that.
Okay, one more quick question and we'll wrap up.
Okay, so I'm glad the service standards question was asked, and my answer might be answered in whatever the service standards end up being, but just curious to hear what you guys think about this question. So we talked about equity and ridership. I'm curious about how ridership numbers on routes that serve disenfranchised communities, how they might not be as high as others due to the very nature of this investment that led to low density and shuttered businesses. That maybe that's the reason why there's maybe lower ridership, but there's still an equity component to that service. So I'm just wondering, how do you envision the balance between equity and chasing rides?
One, this has got to be one of the core questions that comes before the NITA board, is really starting with a values discussion, and a value of having an equitable transit system is what our region is about, and it's what's in the NITA law. And so I think it's important for those board members to really put that out there, and then figure out what is the right way to evaluate that, and be a little agnostic of what service means. It's about access. So if you're in a low density, suburban community that has challenges, you have high no-car ridership, or there might be a lack of access, an articulated bus running every 10 minutes may not be the most efficient way to serve them. So really looking at all of the assets that you have across the region is the opportunity that NITA has that hadn't had it before. Whereas before it was like, this is a pace thing, this is a rideshare thing. Now it's sort of like, well, what do we have that we can serve? And how do we prioritize that? I think that's really where the discussion should evolve. I'll bring up, because this is a really nerdy group, and I feel like I'm included in it, so I get to talk about this. There's a really good example of when CMAP decided to take on pavement management systems for the region. I saw Elizabeth give me a little clap. And we had to answer that question of like, what does equity mean in that? And so when you were ranking, the pavement management systems are super engineering heavy, do this one first, do this one second. Starting to looking at those places that have bus service and what is the need in that. That really allowed others from other communities, other councils of mayors to say, you know what, equity is a value, so we're going to prioritize doing this first, not in my region, but in that, so that that benefit comes online first for the people that need it most. I'm hopeful that one of the early discussions that we're going to start seeing at the NITA board is, how does that translate into transit service, transit capital investment?
Great, thank you so much. As we're wrapping up, I just want to acknowledge that the people on this stage have been working so many hours for years and are still working day and night to implement this bill. So I just want to appreciate Deputy Governor Scudder, Director Kotarac, Maulik, and Jonathan. Thank you for all that you've done up to date and that you're going to be doing in the months and years ahead. And with that, thank you.